Welcome back to another discussion, our first discussion of Numbers. So a minute ago when I was doing the Torah portion, I said that our portion was
Bamidbar.
I've said too many names now. They are all going together. Bamidbar. And that actually means in the wilderness. It does not mean Numbers. I was getting myself thoroughly confused by the list I was looking at. Anyway, it means in the wilderness. So this is Numbers chapter 1 through 4, verse 20, so about halfway through 20, or verse that. It's one of those days, isn't it?
Yes.
Chapter 4, verse 20. That's where it stops. So,
well, one of the things that I like to talk about when we come to this book of the Bible is the thing that happened in my mind that brought this book alive. Because I hate the title Numbers. Because Numbers, as long as it was numbers in my mind, I would read it with nauseam. Because that's all it was a bunch of numbers.
all right.
And one day I came to a realization. Okay, yes, Bamidbar doesn't mean numbers, it means in the wilderness. But what does that mean? And then I got to thinking, okay, at that time we had an old Suburban that was full of about 400 kids.
Leonard, the Tetris master.
You
get 360 of them just in the cargo hold of your Suburban. You leave it nice and roomy up front.
And we went to town that day, and we got done at the store, and we got back in the vehicle, and I did roll call. And everybody was there. And the lights went on. Bing! I just numbered my children. I just made sure everybody was there because we were done with that session of life and we were about to go on a journey. And I wanted to make sure who was there. So if we understand that this is the first day of the second month of the second year, in other words, we're just barely a year out of Egypt. And God's making sure who made it through that journey, who made it through that stage and is ready to go on the journey to the promised land.
Yeah.
Well, being present for that roll call was pretty darn important. Now it's not just numbers ad nauseum. Now, I'll admit that there's a whole lot of this portion I still don't understand, and I would love to.
Yeah.
But it means so much more to me now. But one of the things I'd like to point out is there's a few things that in here that is said that's not emphasized that we can get some hints from.
Okay.
One of them is an example of what you do on the new moon.
Really?
It's the first day of the second month. This was a new moon assembly. And on that assembly, the leaders were assembled. This is one of the things that was done that new moon. There's another thing that kind of is mentioned in passing here. What does the Torah say is the age of a young man coming into adulthood?
Yeah. Well, 20. Although we infer that because that's when you're allowed to go to war, basically. That's when you're ready to go to war. So presumably then you're adult.
Right. And much different than our common culture.
A little bit, yeah. Ironically, because of war. So in the United States, you couldn't vote until age 21, up until, I guess, the 70s somewhere. And because of all of the controversy over the Vietnam War and, guys being sent there before that, they were like, well, wait a minute, it's not fair that you can be forced to, because they had draft, you can be forced to go to war that you can't vote against.
Right.
And so they lowered the voting age to 18.
And there were a number of people in the Vietnam era that they had their options at as young as the age of 16 of reform school or join up. Some judges made some unknowing decisions. A friend of mine was 17 when he had his choice, and he chose Nam and spent his life trying to deal with that choice.
Yeah.
But according to the Torah, it is 20 years old that you are able to be numbered and subject for military service. And I personally think that that's a good thing. Though, as a young man growing up, I probably would not have. Because, I started my first business when I was 14, and by the time I was 20, I already had the world by the tail a couple of times, but
yeah.
So there's a lot here to glean from that it doesn't give us specific instructions about, but it talks about.
Yeah.
So let's put this in context. We're the first day of the second month of the second year. What has happened?
They got out of Egypt.
Israel come out of Egypt.
Then they were chased after getting out of Egypt and miraculously escaped.
Yes.
Through the Red Sea. Then they had their meeting with God on Sinai, right? At this point. And they have basically just received the law, although not right before this, but several months before this, right?
Yes.
Like back about 6 months, 8 months, something like that.
So they've received the law. Something else that they received at the same time that has been ongoing.
The covenant?
The manna.
The manna. That's right, the manna.
Okay, so they've spent some time, arguably about a year, receiving the manna. They received instructions for the tabernacle, and they have built the tabernacle.
Right.
So Israel's kind of been in limbo, receiving things from God, and now you are a holy redeemed people. You have the instructions. You've had the provision. You have built the tabernacle so God can dwell among you. Now we're ready for another chapter.
By the way, I just noticed too that this would have been right after their first remembrance Passover.
Yes.
Their second Passover, but the first one was the real deal,
Right.
in Egypt. This is right after their first remembrance Passover.
Good point. So they're actually in the time of the counting of the Omer.
They are.
And we're assembling the people and we're numbering them or counting them. And what else happens as they're counted?
Well, they get arranged, don't they? In chapter 2, this is where it really goes into that.
And
I have a little map here. I'll lay it over here.
it would seem that we have this is numbering those that are of age to go to war.
Yeah.
All the language that we have here, this is how they're to be arranged when they camp, and it also talks about how they are arranged when they are mobile.
Yeah.
This is a military array. This is how you proceed. Now these numbers, what was it 600? There it is, 603,550.
Mm-hmm.
That's just of those able to go to war. Arguably, 3 million people.
Yeah, it's a big camp.
Yeah.
And you have them arranged too, so that you have, quote unquote, the camp of Judah to the east. So that's Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun.
Mm-hmm.
You have the camp of Ephraim to the west. That's Benjamin, Manasseh, and Ephraim. North, you have the camp of Dan, Asher, and Naphtali. And south, you have the camp of Reuben, which is Gad, Simeon, and Reuben.
Mm-hmm. Which, incidentally, as we discussed a little bit, I really want to sit down and write out the meanings of these names
Mm-hmm.
and go back and put that in. The meanings of the Hebrew names to see if this is telling us more than our simple minds can understand.
Yeah.
I think it will.
Yeah, because Hebrew names have meanings more than what we think of. Like somebody's named William, we don't really think about what could William mean. But the Hebrew names had meaning, and they were largely considered prophetic, right?
Sometimes. Yeshua's name literally means the salvation of God. Joseph's name meant continuing for perpetuity.
Moses is like drawn out of the water, or drawn out.
And if you understand those Hebrew names, then you understand a person's goal in life. But in this case, I think if you understood the Hebrew names, that all this would read much more, much richer. And I'm embarrassed to say that I have had that notion now for way too many years not to have done it. A lot of reasons, no excuses. But that might be, this is something I want to verbalize.
Okay.
If the book of Numbers is not rich and meaningful to you, dig some more.
Yeah.
Because there's no idle word in the Torah. And this is part of the Torah, and it's there for our understanding.
Yeah.
And as a Christian, I always just fast-forwarded through it.
Mm-hmm.
Wondered why it was there. Fell asleep many times reading through it. And my understanding is still very elementary. But it's helped me bring it alive.
Yeah.
And I think that there's much more there that I don't understand yet.
What about, so we have the Levites, they're numbered separately, but they're explicitly excluded from this first census, which is counting the men of war.
Mm-hmm.
Or, well, men who are, who are 20 years and older, and so presumably the men of war. But the Levites are not counted in that census. They're explicitly excluded. And then they're counted in the second census right away, but in that case, it's all the men from the age of 1 month old and upward.
Mm-hmm.
So, and this it's doing because they are a stand-in for the firstborn of the children of Israel. Because he says, the firstborn are consecrated unto me. Or they were consecrated unto God, in the Passover from then on. And so they would be a stand-in to that. It seems to me that there's something very interesting going on there, and I can't really wrap my head around it.
I'm not sure that I know the answer to that, but I would say look at how they're arranged.
Yeah.
Where are the Levites?
They're right around the tabernacle.
Right around the tabernacle at the center of the camp. It speaks to me that the camp with the tabernacle in the center, and the tabernacle being the place where God himself dwells. And that's where the Levites are. And then surrounding that is the rest of Israel as the men of war. Now, the Levites were numbering month old and older.
Yeah.
But the rest of the men of war are 20 years old and older that we're numbering. It speaks to me that there is a physical thing that's happening and a spiritual thing that's happening. And the Levites are there as a spiritual protector, while the rest are there as a physical protector. Now, I would say that my hunch is that if the lines ever fell, you would find out that the Levites may have been the special forces.
Yeah, the last line of defense.
They were the guys that you thought you had an easy time with the rest.
Yeah.
But primarily they're there as spiritual protectors. Does that make any sense?
I think so. It does say that if you come close to the tabernacle that you die.
Mm-hmm.
And then they're there to do that part, to take it down and set it up. You can't interfere with that. In fact, you have concentric rings of that, because then inside you have the Sons of Kohath.
Mm-hmm.
They're the ones that are supposed to go through and put the coverings on everything, get everything ready to move, and then the Levites that are supposed to move those things come in, and they pick it up by the handles, basically, not touch the rest of it, and they move it. So you have, I guess you have concentric rings of this, perhaps you could call it a spiritual protection.
Yeah, which I find very ironic that the group that has done a really good job of preserving that is the Catholics. They mimic it, at least. And once you understand this, you can see that in that, well, it's only this group that gets to sit down face-to-face with the Pope, and then they bring it out to the next group. And, you know, they didn't make this stuff up.
Yeah.
They were following a pattern.
They were, yeah. They adopted a lot of the priesthoods. Well, I mean, even the incense and whatnot. You've got these big censers that they swing and, you know, those kinds of things.
Yeah. And it's... no, I'm not going to talk about the other part that I'm thinking about. So, well, there's one other thing. Do we know what happens when somebody gets killed off in the Bible? Do we typically hear about them again?
Depends on who it is.
It does. And that's the reason I bring this up, because we have two people that are mentioned by name that were killed off. And usually when somebody's killed off in the Bible, they're forgotten. But Nadab and Abihu were remembered here because they came to the presence of God and offered unauthorized fire. And they had no children. So when it's going through that genealogy of Aaron, Nadab and Abihu are mentioned again. That should make us take note.
Yeah.
I think because why they got killed off was important enough that we can't forget it. Now, exactly what that is, we could argue about that for weeks on end.
Right.
But I think the fact that they are mentioned again means we need to pay attention to that.
Yeah. And at the very least, what they did was perform a ceremony that wasn't prescribed.
Yes.
You know, it might be more than that. You know, because it's called strange fire in the King James. You know, of course, that's a pretty evocative term. You know, you could do all sorts of things with that, but it's like foreign fire. You know, foreign, like you know, not what was prescribed, and they had the power of God in that tabernacle. It's like you don't mess around with that. You can't.
Which is without getting too deep into things, a common phrase today is, well, that's not what I mean by that ceremony.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm one that happens to think that Nadab and Abihu weren't intending they had no ill intent.
Mm-hmm.
They were excited. They were wanting to serve God, but they did something he didn't prescribe.
Mm-hmm.
The same as the golden calf. I don't think that there was a whole lot of ill intent. People were just wanting to worship God.
Mm-hmm.
Scripture tells us that they called the golden calf Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, the God that brought them out of Egypt.
Yeah.
Well, God didn't like that too well.
Yeah.
And I think it's important that we do things his way. And one of the ways that we were to do things was the setting up the camp by tribe.
Mm-hmm.
And I just got convicted of something because I have poo-pooed the idea of tracing your lineage to a particular tribe, and even made the statement of when that's important, I think there'll be ushers, which I do. But at the same time, if this was important enough for God to spell all this out here,
Mm-hmm.
and we don't even know what tribe we're attached to, then how do we know where we're supposed to be?
Yeah. Well, and you have that question in Revelation too, when we have the New Jerusalem, and there are 12 gates in the New Jerusalem, one for each tribe.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, well, which gate do you go to?
Well, and that's where I've used when it becomes important, there'll be ushers.
Yeah.
But
Or you
hey,
can go for a long walk and keep trying your key card at each gate.
That if you're at this gate and you belong at this gate, but you head this direction, that's 1,500 miles times 4.
Yeah.
That's a long walk.
Yeah. It is, but I wonder, and this is, I don't know, okay? What I'm about to say, I don't know. But I wonder if there isn't something to the notion that you're part of a particular tribe, and I wonder if that also becomes part of your purpose. And you see this most clearly with the Levites here. The Levites' purpose is focused towards the center of the camp and is in care for and maintenance and transport of the tabernacle. Mm-hmm. Very clear there. But these other tribes, and especially if you look at the blessings and the cursings of both Jacob and Moses for the different tribes, mm-hmm. It seems like there is a different nature to each tribe, and therefore it begs the question, is there a different purpose?
One year during Sukkot, back in Oklahoma, I was watching what was going on. And I thought I was watching division in the camp. Mm-hmm. And it all had to do with my perspective. What I came to that year is I was sitting there watching and struggling with things internally. I recognized that there wasn't division in the camp, that the tribes were starting to be identified. And if you see somebody from Dan doing something different from someone from Levi, that's not a bad thing.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, it's a quite appropriate thing. And so when we think we're seeing division in the camp, I will caution from personal experience, don't be so quick to call people doing their individual jobs division in the camp.
Now, what were you seeing, by the way, that you were thinking was division in the camp?
What I thought was a lack of unity at certain times. This clique was doing this thing and nobody else was really welcome to join that. Or if they tried to, they just didn't feel comfortable. And this group over here was doing their thing. And And it had became very prominent that after the evening ceremony, I quit running my campfire because I felt like I was promoting the division in the camp, because after the evening ceremony, there would be a certain group that would always gather around my campfire.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, I kicked the fire out, and I said, we're going to go join the other folks. And we did that. And it was good, but it wasn't right. It never felt right. There wasn't a click there. And I interpreted that as division. And after some prayerful consideration, I said, no, it's not. It's just different people with different focuses, and that's okay.
Yeah.
And
well, when your camp gets big enough, it seems almost inevitable, because there's like a threshold wherein a group gets too large to be personal. Right?
Yeah.
And that seems to be part of it. And of course, also if you get a big enough camp, then in terms of tasks and jobs, specialization does make sense.
Yes.
Somebody's really good at organizing the food line, well, maybe they should do more of that. Whereas the people who totally mess it up and, completely destroy the rice.
But you learned a lot.
I did learn very much from that. You cannot make rice in a large stock pot the way that you do at home with the little tiny pot.
Yes.
Does not work. You can burn it and completely soak it at the same time. Like it was like a wet blanket that had been dropped in the campfire at one end. It was bad. For reference, put it in the oven. That's the best way to do it. Anyway.
I feel like we raised a whole lot of questions.
Yeah. Didn't give very many answers,
but I think one of the most important answers that we have there is there were 12 tribes, and there was Levi, and each one had a particular job to do.
Yeah.
And it's okay for Judah not to be doing Levi's job. Matter of fact, it's important that Judah doesn't do Levi's job.
That's right.
And vice versa. And Dan has a job all of his own.
Yeah.
And everybody needs to find their place and do that.
I think that is a fabulous note to end on for this particular Torah portion. So, folks, read your Bible, pray to the Lord, find your place in His kingdom, fulfill your purpose. God bless you.
Baruch Hashem.